this is why we're laughing here. So good afternoon, everyone. We are. It seems that the angle of interest in our today seminar is kind of doubled from compared to our usual group that is coming to the CLEA seminars, because people who are following the CLEA seminars might sometimes wonder what this name of the center means, and like sometimes check it on the website, but it's not really like clear, and the hero behind the name of the center for our regular audience is not very familiar. This is one angle, yes. So for those people who follow our CLEA seminars, today is like a reveal day of what it is all about in our day. So it's important for us to have this conversation. But there is another angle of interest for people who work at the VUB, study at the VUB, live in Belgium, are very well familiar with the name. Actually, two names, because we have two heroes today and two legends of our philosophy department coming into like an interesting composition. So we will be listening about Leo Apostel, one legend, from another legend from Jean Paul van Bendegem. So that's the day, and yeah, we are all ears.
Okay, thank you. I should perhaps first tell you that I'm at this moment in treatment with my dentist, and it's all going very well. But at this particular moment, I'm simply lacking my front teeth of the above part. So this may, well, it's not yet Kermit the Frog, but I'm probably within an hour I will be approaching that pretty closely, I'm afraid. So if at some point the understanding in terms of identifying the vowels and the consonants becomes a problem, do tell me. As to content, that's a different matter, of course. When I got the invitation to do this seminar, I was really very pleased, to be quite honest, because I have done this lecture before. Because on the initiative of the Mastereel Fonds, one of the cultural societies that populate the Flemish cultural landscape, they had the idea of making a series of 4 lectures on the 4 philosophers that have been important at the University of Ghent, namely Etienne Vermeers, Jaap Kruithof, Rudolf Boehm, and Leo Apostel. And the idea was that for each of them, somebody would be asked to do the lecture on that philosopher, and they asked me whether I was willing to do Leo Apostel. Now, next slide. Yeah. What I want to do is, first of all, tell you a bit on sources, because there is a very hard and difficult problem with Apostel in terms of biography. There's not that much material to work on, so it's not easy. And as far as I know, nobody has done the effort to try to write a decent biography. So I will explain in a minute. Then I will give a short biography of Leo Apostel, and then I will try, which is of course the hardest part, to explain what his philosophy was all about. I cannot cover everything. I mean, that's totally impossible. I will explain why. And then I want to say a few words on the impact that Apostel has had on the academic research, mainly, although not exclusively, mainly in Flanders, but also in Belgium. I want to reserve some 10 minutes. I have labeled it here outreach, namely the presence of Leo Apostel in the public domain, so outside of academia, because that was very important to him. Well, not only to him, it was a characteristic of Etienne Vermeers, Jaap Kruithof, Rudolf Boehm, the Ghent philosophers I mentioned. And it's worth, paying attention to it, because then it deals with atheist spirituality or spiritual atheism, whatever order you prefer. but also about Freemasonry, for instance. Those are all the interests that were part of his outreach. Well, to run ahead, one of the peculiarities of with Leo Apostel was that he was well known as a philosopher. I mean, but rather as a person. When he appeared, everybody knew, Leo Apostel is there. But whenever you ask the question, yes, but his philosophy, what is it all about? Basically, nobody had an idea. And that's odd. I mean, in a sense, the person is well known, but not what the person stands for. And only in the very last period of his life, this changed. And then I will try to conclude, which of course will only be a temporary conclusion. Yeah. So what do we have in terms of sources? Well, in 1989 appeared 3 volumes of the philosophy of Leo Apostel under the editorship of Fernand van Damme and Rick Pinkston. And it was based on the format of the famous Schilp volumes. So one, a number of philosophers write something about the philosophy of the person who is the subject of the book. Then the philosopher has the opportunity to respond to all these contributions. And then there's supposed to be a biography and a bibliography of the philosopher. That is the topic of the book. So it's based on that format. So there's the volume with the essays to which I also contributed. Then replies from the philosophers, so from the Apostle, and then the third one is the philosopher Leo Apostel, a life history. Now this is rather special because the person who interviewed Leo Apostel quite extensively was Ingrid van Doorn. But the thing was that very rarely did Leo Apostel himself check whether what he was remembering, whether that was actually what had taken place. So there are in fact some contradictions in this life history, where you say, well, even given quantum mechanics for microscopic organisms, it's very unlikely to be at the same time in the United States and in Amsterdam. I mean, today, in some sense, this would be possible, but not back then. So it's very hard. You have to be very, very careful with this life history. It's not always that reliable. And in some cases where I actually tried to verify precise dates, it was really difficult. And in the sense that we still have some living sources. For instance, I will mention him later, Diderik Batens. But, well, one should take the time to interview him. And that is at present not really happening, unfortunately. There is a website from the University of Ghent where you find a short biography, the most extensive bibliography you can imagine. Really, it's very extensive. I will explain in a minute why that is the case, and a number of unfinished manuscripts. So manuscripts that were not yet in the stage of being publishable, and so they are on the website. That's good. Yeah. Why is it that we have this bibliography that is really excellent? That is all due to the work of Jean Paul. Jean Paul was a very dear friend of Leo Apostel for the main part of his later life. Unfortunately, she also passed away a number of years ago. And what she actually did was she did the effort to collect from every item in the bibliography the actual printed version. So this at present, if I'm well informed, is now in hands of the Central Library at the University of Ghent. So it's now waiting when that will be disclosed, etc., etc. We all know that process. Yeah. So as said, a fair number of texts have been published posthumously and are available on the website. And it's also important, 2 elements. Leo Apostel was somebody who wrote in at least, well, no, basically in 3 languages. A lot of his work is in English, but also a substantial part is in French. You will see in a minute why. But a very large part was written in Dutch. This was really, in that sense, an issue, an important issue, namely that you should also write in the language that is locally spoken. And of course, if he was writing something that had to do with local politics or local culture, whatever, then he preferred to write it in Dutch. And then there is this peculiarity of Leo Apostel, which really characterized him, well, I wouldn't say perfectly, but really. We all knew that was one of his major problems. There are not altogether that many papers published in well, I have used the description major journals. I'm not saying the highest ranked journals, etc., but I mean, take Mind or Synthese. There are no papers of him in those journals. And this had a very particular, well, a twofold reason. Namely, Apostel was really incapable of reading a proof of a paper. So if he would get the proof copy, he could not simply check it and see if everything was all right. What he did was basically to rewrite the paper, because he then had the idea, oh, I have simply forgotten to add this. So he added stuff to it. And then, of course, the editor says, but that's not the idea. It's only about commas, etc. So they say, oh, drop it. The most dramatic version, by the way, is not in his academic research, but when he wrote the book on the Freemasonry. This was an outcome of a series of lectures in the chair Theodor Verhagen, where he spoke about Freemasonry. This gave rise to a small booklet about 100 and something pages in English, Freemasonry, a philosophical essay. And this was then, well, a Flemish editor proposed to have it translated. And they found a translator, Jan van Belt, who was willing to do it. I've spoken with Jan afterwards, and he said me, this was hell. This was really hell. You would have translated chapter 1, 20 pages. You gave it to Apostel, and when you came back 2 weeks later, the barely touched 20 pages that were being translated, but 50 pages were added to it. And so Jan did all the effort to integrate these additional notes. In fact, the Dutch version is close to 400 pages. That's typically, so that's why he's not present. I mean, he is the person who once sent a paper to the journal Mind in a handwritten version. And of course, the editor said, look, can you please have a typed version, please? Yes, thank you. They said, what? So in that sense, whenever you would tell him, okay, this journal is interested in a paper on this or that, would you please do it? But take into account the following desiderata from the journal, then he would say, forget it. That's why we have this funny position that he seems to be. I mean, if today you would pull his bibliography from a pure, to take the VUB example, this would be a rather meager, to be quite honest. Okay, yeah. So that's about the sources. So you see. I will indicate at some point where I thought, well, here I'm not quite sure if the year I'm mentioning is really correct. Okay, he was born in Antwerp, 4 September 1925. Studied philosophy at the Universiteit Libre de Brussel. Yes, we are. You see, he graduated in 1948. At that moment, this university, the Vrije Universiteit, was not existing. So in Brussels, you had the Universiteit Libre de Brussel. Which made that the Apostel was perfectly bilingual in Dutch and French. His thesis, quite interesting, was on introspection. And if you see it in the time frame, 1948, okay, yeah, there was this discussion going on whether or not introspection is a reliable source of knowledge. I mean, this is the time when everybody came up with these examples while talking about the teeth. You're saying that it hurts here really awfully, and then the dentist is looking at the teeth there, and then says the source of the problem is here. You say, no, the pain is there. He says that's compatible. So how reliable is the introspection? That was really an issue at that moment. When he graduated, he became an assistant of Ghent University. I will come back to Paranormal because he's one of the 4 sources that had a profound impact on Leo Apostel. He became an assistant with Ghent University, who was then a professor for logic at the ULB. Yeah. In the academic year 50-51, he traveled to the USA, actually by boat, which I still find, for some reason, this has a romantic ring to it for me. Took quite some time. He was a CRB fellow, that's the Committee for the Relief in Belgium, so the post-war effort to try to get things going again, and getting a grant to go to the United States was part of that. He spent 1 semester in Chicago, 1 in Yale. In Chicago, he worked with Rudolf Carnap, and of course that was a second source. On the other hand, this was not, he was clearly not all that impressed. On the other hand, in Yale with Gustav Hempel. For Americans, Peter Hempel, which is still quite strange why Gustav was too complex a name apparently, so they changed his name to Peter, which was easier. Okay, fine. I mean, so there is a book dedicated to Peter Hempel, also known as Gustav Hempel, but actually his name is Gustav Hempel. Okay, sorry, yeah. From 1952 to 1956, he became a researcher with a grant of the, at those days, the NFWO, Nationaal Fondswetenschappelijk Onderzoek. It's only later on that they became separated, so that we got the FWO Vlaanderen, whereas on the French-speaking side, they still stick to the N, but still the FNRS. They simply say Fonds National. Doesn't matter, we leave the N there. March 53, which is rather amusing in the sense that this is the month of and the year of my birth. So in that very month, he became a doctor in philosophy with a thesis on, and then you see one of his topics that when we were talking about natural philosophy, that's really one of his topics, laws and causes, la loi et les causes. In fact, historical interesting detail, I think, that PhD was the third one, because the first one, when he showed it to Paranormal said, look, Leo, this is really mathematics, that's not philosophy. And so I was like, okay, fine, and he put it aside. Second attempt, almost a different topic. It's not that he reworked the one thing, it was something else. And now Peterman had objections, had different objections. So that one went also out of the window. And the third one was successful, namely La Loi et les Causes. 55, 56, he spends at the Université de Genève. I will explain how that came about, where he became a member of the Centre International d'Epistémologie Génétique. And that's the third person that had a tremendous influence on Leo Apostel, namely Jean Piaget. But there is a fourth one that is very rarely mentioned, but I firmly believe that that there is a fourth one. Okay, thank you. He remained a foreign member of that center until the death of Piaget in 1980. That's actually the year when there was a summer school that I attended together with Leo Apostel. And in 1983, he became he received an honorary doctorate from the Université de Genève, the only honorary doctorate he got in his life. Starting now back to his position, starting from 1956, he became a professor at the ULB, teaching general courses in philosophy, logic, and epistemology. And in 1957, he became professor at the at that moment Vrije Universiteit Ghent, because this was still today we would say it's on the federal level of Belgium. So Vrije Universiteit Ghent. A very peculiar detail, I really must mention this, 1957, and it was the philosopher and well, specialized in ethics, Koen Raas, who's unfortunately, well, who passed away a number of years ago now, who actually showed me the newspaper clipping, because I said, look, Koen, this is impossible. I mean, in 1957, I can't believe this. But he actually showed me the newspaper with that article. So Apostel was appointed as full professor at the Vrije Universiteit Ghent. And in the newspaper, the Standaard, which in those days was a really outspoken Catholic newspaper. The headline said, Antwerp Jew appointed professor at University of Ghent, 1957. Wow. It's only when he showed me the article that said, yeah, okay, that's in fact what it says, it's true. Wow, Universiteit benoemt de Antwerpse Jood. To be the exact in the wording, even the wording is sounds wrong. I mean, totally. In 58-59, he was a guest professor at the Pennsylvania State University, and then he retired from the VUB. So in the meantime, the VUB was founded, and many of the professors of the ULB either had an appointment at both the institutions, but some simply moved over. And Apostel also made the step from the ULB to the VUB. And he retired in 1974 from the VUB and 79 from the university, at that moment already University of Ghent. 79, as you can see, he was born in 25, so he was 54 at that moment. But this had to do with his health condition. He was having rather severe heart problems. Underwent the operation, and okay, no problem there. Well, two things. The story goes that when he was granted the early retirement because he had made an application, whether from an ordinary professor, gewoon hoogleraar, he could become a research assistant. So that's about 5 steps down, if you think in those terms, because he wanted to do philosophical research. He was so fed up with all the misery of academic life. So he said, can I do some research, please? And I'm willing to give it all up. And then he said, okay, you have early retirement. You will set a very bad example to everybody. We cannot have this. And when he was granted, and that is true, when he was granted the early retirement, what he said to Diderik Batens was, now I can finally do what I prefer to do philosophy, which he then did, in fact. So that's 1979. There are still 15 or 16 years to go, and a major part of his output is from that period. He died on 10th of August 1995, 3 weeks before his 70th birthday. He died in the most beautiful way imaginable, I think, as a true philosopher. He was found sitting on his bed, leaning against the wall with a book in his hands. Which book? I don't know. No. Okay. Yes. Maybe it was a bit important inside. Okay. Yeah. of special interest, and that's why I said to me that there is a fourth one. In 50-51, you see there's something not quite right with his stay in America, in Chicago and Yale. Was he in Amsterdam before that or after that? That's not clear at the moment, and I'm afraid, because I have asked people in the Netherlands, Harry de Zwarte, among others, and he too was in doubt whether when exactly Apostel was in Amsterdam. But when he was there, he worked with Evert Willem Beth, Gerrit Monnery, and Luitsen Egbertus Jan Brouwer. I think in terms of being known, Brouwer comes first because he's a mathematician, philosopher, the founder of intuitionism, etc., etc. Second, but then yeah, you already have to know a bit more. Evert Willem Beth. Beth was the person who's responsible for what is still known as a very important semantic technique in formal logic, namely the so-called Beth tableaus. The tableau method is a particular method for finding out whether a formula is valid or not. That's Beth. But there's also Gerrit Monnery, and he's fairly unknown. Well, thanks to the among others, the efforts of Harry de Zwarte, Mireille Krekels has, for her PhD, has written a biography and also a philosophical analysis of life and work of Gerrit Monnery. Unfortunately, in Dutch, but okay, we now do have a good, solid reference work, which I think is very important. In 64, I will come back to Monnery a bit later. In 64, thanks to Apostel, Beth received an honorary doctorate from the University of Ghent. Although, I mean, they very often disagreed, Beth and Leo. I mean, on many occasions, but somehow to Apostel, that was very inspiring. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you wanted. Somebody saying that you are on the wrong track, etc. In terms of being stimulated, yes. Unfortunately, Beth at that moment was already too ill to come to Ghent and receive the honorary doctorate. Here you have a very tiny, a small, it's an abstract basically from one of the meetings of the Association of Symbolic Logic, where you have a publication of Leo Apostel in one of the major journals, namely the Journal of Symbolic Logic, and you see the date 1955. And you see, it's a rather technical problem. It's about can you define a measure? So it's about measure theory in Brouwerian algebras, because they are of course not the same as Boolean algebras, etc., etc. So I mean, at that time he was doing really technical work, so to speak. It's only later on that he widened his scope. Yeah. Now, okay, the hardest part. I have put the focus, and I know it's thereby incomplete, on his method. Because I think if you talk with people who have worked with Leo Apostel, the main idea, well, what they keep repeating is that Leo Apostel gave you a way of working, a way of approaching problems and dealing with them. So I have now put the focus on the methods, and I know, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's too difficult in terms of content. We have so many topics to deal with. But the characteristics of the method is that he was always, he stressed the importance of the use of logic to achieve clarity, insight, and understanding. But very importantly, I think I'm not exaggerating this claim here that I have written down here. I think it's really something that was central to his philosophy. The logic is not a goal on its own. I mean, it's not. Well, we used to joke a little bit about your average paper in the Journal of Philosophical Logic. The main body of the paper was somebody who found an interesting technical result, and you had the technical presentation of it and the completeness proof if necessary, etc. And then you would say, okay, and now I have to frame this philosophically, and then you would get this introductory paragraph that explained the philosophical relevance, which you were hopelessly seeking in the rest of the paper, because basically it wasn't there. I mean, I would assume the kind of thing that you could now ask artificial intelligence to do. I mean, write a philosophical introduction to logical paper. I have to, okay, we used to make jokes about that, because that was what Apostel did not want to do. So it's not a goal on its own. And this had a very important implication. Namely, he was not one of those philosophers that would stick to one particular logic. I mean, and I have to confess to my amazement, the discussion is still going on whether there is such a thing as the one true logic. I mean, I find this so odd. I mean, being having worked with Leo Apostel, that's the last thing we're going to say. Oh, that one must be the one true logic. Okay, very odd. So the thing was that you became very open-minded as to the choice of logic. I mean, meaning that I want to analyze this problem, and if I want to analyze this problem and I want to use logic, what kind of logic would be most appropriate to allow me to analyze this problem in the, I'm not going to say, sorry, in the best way possible, but in the richest way possible, so that I can derive the most out of it. Whenever he analyzed things, it was always to achieve synthesis. So in that sense, the two are always connected. I will come back to that, hopefully. Is there an upper limit where you say, now really you have to shut up? No, good.
No.
No, it might be the case.
We stick with you.
Because I'm going a bit too slow, but
That's okay.
on the other hand, okay, I think it's important. So I will come back to the worldviews project, where too he always used the plural. It's worldviews. I have really added related to the unity of science idea, but not the same. I mean, if we think about the famous Oppenheim-Putnam paper from the 50s, the unity of science is a working hypothesis, where this idea is presented from the extreme form of reductionism, where sociology is reduced to psychology, psychology to biology, etc. Something that Etienne Vermeers really hung on to almost till the last moment, but not for Leo Apostel, no way. But it was the idea to somehow arrive at forms of a synthesis. Let me put it in those terms. And of course, Leo Apostel was always very fun to work together with people who were also trained in speaking quite largely, a scientific field. So in my case, being a mathematician, you will see why he found that really interesting. And in fact, it gave me my topic for my PhD. Was basically under the influence of Leo Apostel. But the idea for him that, well, the way that I prefer to express it is, suppose that you are performing an armchair philosophy and you are thinking about space and time, what can they be, what are they like, etc., etc. And imagine that you arrive at an analysis based on the first principles, etc. Then it would be very, very strange for Leo Apostel if you would not check that with what physics is saying. It's not that you are accepting what the physicists are saying. I mean, that's not the idea. But at least you will have the confrontation to see, is it compatible? Are there frictions? Are there contradictions? And how can you solve them, etc. And this had a very important consequence, namely that philosophy becomes an open-ended activity. I mean, he was always very aware of the idea that what I write today, probably within 20 or 30 years, will have to be rewritten, but by somebody else, because I cannot do it, because I don't see where will we be within 20, 30 years. But he had well the conviction that within 20, 30 years, the philosophical, what the philosophical problems are that you will deal with will be different, because the status of scientific development will also have changed. At the same time, this very interesting paper, philosophical problems can be treated as scientific problems, namely the paper, Can Metaphysics Be a Science? I mean, you hear somewhere the Husserlian echo here, where he actually says that philosophy could proceed in the same way that science, well, with a number of adaptations, of course, but in the same way that science proceeds. You can have the same kind of rigor, if you like. This is still, I think, one of his most important papers, to be quite honest. Can Metaphysics Be a Science? Locally published, namely, I will come back to that as well, in Studia Philosophica Gambensia, so the journal of the philosophy department in Ghent at that moment. Yeah. Now, what are the consequences of this way of working? I have listed three. One is that often his work might appear as being eclectic, because he covered so many topics. And the perfect illustration is his magnum opus, what I consider to be, I'm not the only one, his magnum opus, namely Materieform. 2 volumes altogether, about 700 pages. But as I indicated, reading proof copies was impossible. So this was never corrected. And it's really, at moments, it pains me to have to say this, but at moments it's dramatic. There's one chapter on where he talks about the Turing machines. And I mean, you have pages where there are 15 mistakes in the symbolism, but simply, I mean, wrong notation, etc. So if there would have been a good corrector, that could have been avoided, but okay. By the way, when he received the help, and you have to help me out now, the great prize for career achievement. Solvay, yeah, thank you very much. The Solvay, which was in those days 2 million Belgian francs, which was quite a nice sum. I mean, it would allow you to pay somebody for 4 years to do research. So of course we all said to Apostel, okay, this is excellent. Use the money to have a good edition of Materieform. And knowing you will have to update it. So it will be 900 pages, it doesn't matter, do it. But he said, no, because then I have to read it again. I can't do that. So at one particular moment, the language changes in Materieform. Can you imagine? So it starts in English, and then all of a sudden it switches to French. So he hadn't really, okay, and parts of it have been dictated directly to the person who was, actually typing the copy ready to print. So, so I mean, okay. And it is really his magnum opus, and such an important idea. He came back to his topic of causality. That was really one of his major themes, causality. So also his PhD was on causality. And he had this beautiful idea that causality is a productive force. It produces something. It's not saying cause, effect, relationship, formal relationship, whatever, or no relationship at all, if we follow Wittgenstein in the Tractatus. if you do believe in causality, you are being superstitious, etc. No, no, no. The cause produces the effect. And he wanted to understand this. He wanted to understand this production relation. That's really the basic thing of material progress. I said that many unfinished projects, because he was working on many things at the same time. So his design of a natural philosophy, one part has been published in book form, the other part is as a manuscript on the website that I already mentioned. And finally, at different times, he had different interests. I mean, in the later part of his life, logic was not really the main thing, so to speak. This goes together with the period of the outreach, where he started to get more attention from the general public, so to speak. And so you have more papers on the spiritual atheism, or the atheistic spirituality, whatever you prefer, on ethics, freemasonry, and the worldviews project. So you see a shift. This happened a number of times. Okay, I will try to be a bit briefer now. But I have to apologize, but you are giving me now the opportunity to talk about somebody who has had a tremendous impact on my intellectual life. So I really wanted to tell it all, which is a silly idea. But okay. The first one of the main influences on Apostel, Jean Paul. Perelman in his first period can be described as an analytical philosopher in the logical empiricist tradition, the way that Alfred Ehr in his Language, Truth and Logic sketched out the caricature of the logical empiricist. Really. But later on, his focus turned to argumentation theory as practical reasoning. And here, there was an interesting difference between Apostel and Perelman. Perelman, in a sense, wanted to stick to the idea of keeping argumentation theory on one hand and formal logic on the other hand separated. And whereas for Apostel, I will come back to that in a minute, the two could be inspirational to one another. Now, the idea for Perelman, I think I have, okay, no. The most, I will come to it's a slide after that. The most well-known book of Perelman, together with Lucie Albrecht-Stitica, is the Traité de l'Argumentation, la Nouvelle Rhétorique. So, theory of argumentation theory, the new rhetorics. And of course, you might wonder why call it the new rhetorics if you stick to the classic opposition of saying, what is the standard story? Logic has to do with truth, and in a way, no matter how unpleasant the truth may be, still it is a truth. Whereas argumentation theory is about efficiency, and if necessary, I can lie as much as I want. If I thereby achieve my goal. I'm now drawing a caricature of myself, but you know the famous examples. Say that I noticed that there's a fire starting there. I want to get you all out of the room, but you all collectively tell me that no, we're not moving. You have to finish the lecture. I say, well, that's really a fire starting. So, it doesn't matter. If I then say, well, okay, 3 drinks in the opinion, and you all storm out. Then I disappear because I do not have any intention of offering 3 drinks in opinion. Okay, you're now over there. Fine, I have got you out of the room, and that's how sophists got a bad reputation. But that's not the idea of Perelman. Perelman's problem was this. Okay, I'm doing it again. Sorry. Okay, what he says in this excerpt from Traité de l'Argumentation is, okay, true, we have this particular language, and he's now talking about logic and mathematics. Well, yes, you have this precision, and the terms mean exactly what they mean, etc. There are no ambiguities. toute obscurité, all darkness, all confusion has been eliminated. And in a way he says, well, that's fine for mathematicians, but please do not let them impose those desiderata on the everyday way that we discuss and debate and talk with one another. So it's rather, he's not saying let us keep it separate because they are totally different in nature, if you like, but rather because you're saying, well, look, they want to impose a model on from that side, logic, mathematics. They want to impose a particular model on the everyday argumentation of people, and that's no good. I mean, this has to have its separate foundation, if you like. Whereas Apostel will always try to see whether the one can be helpful to the other. Yeah. Second, Rudolf Carnap. And that, well, Apostel was the reason that he wanted to go to Chicago to work during a semester with Rudolf Carnap was because of the Logische Aufbau der Welt, the logical structure of the world, the first major book of Rudolf Carnap, which I still think is a really impressive book. It's really, if only because of the footnote where he says, I basically agree with Husserl. Our differences are on this and that. I mean, here is Rudolf Carnap associated with the Wiener Kreis, and of course they opposed, etc., etc. But okay, I mean, yeah, sorry, but it was not exactly like that, to be quite honest. In this autobiography that I mentioned, so the conversations he had with Ingrid van Doren, he says this. I still. It's so beautiful. When I met Carnap, I felt he was everything I had imagined he should be. He was deep, clear, considerate, modest, giving all his attention to his students and his work, explaining with care the difficult things he was doing. And in fact, he was doing difficult things. I mean, his probability analysis on logical grounds, that's very, very impressive, to say the least. And the next slide is really very special. Again, from the same source. Can you imagine this? Carnap invited me to do my PhD thesis with him in Chicago. I was honored by the suggestion, but declined it with regret. I said, what? The brilliant Carnap, whom I highly respected as a thinker and as a human being, did not lead a happy life at his university. In staff meetings, I often experienced how less creative people but with greater administrative power attacked him. I knew my weakness and was not sure whether I would be able to endure this stressful atmosphere. This comes from the person who, when he was appointed dean, quite involuntarily, quit after 1 year. And everybody agreed that it was a very good thing. Precisely because of this. I had to, and then moreover, Carnap overwhelmed me. I had to admire him from afar. My relation to him in a certain sense could have become self-destructive. These are really heavy words. So that's why he refused to write a PhD with Rudolf Carnap. Imagine if he would have said yes, what that would have meant. Okay. Yeah. And then the third one, Jean Piaget. Okay, I can be very brief here. I assume a psychologist, best known for his studies on the development of thinking in children. Okay, later extended into this famous genetic epistemology, the epistemologie génétique, and to biological processes. Actually, when I followed this summer course in Geneva, we had the opportunity to see some of the classic experiments performed once again. For our benefit, literally for our benefit. And I mean, this was really amazing to see five-year-olds perform a task where you would say, so you're not making this connection. You're analyzing this clearly in a different way. That I mean, I could really imagine Jean Piaget and his collaborators that they would be deeply impressed and really being eager to try to understand what was going on. Which did not prevent, by the way, that in one of the seminars, they explained a new kind of experiment they were doing, namely, when do people or children realize that sometimes to solve a problem, you have to do some backtracking. So you seem to be going in the opposite direction, but that allows you to get to the solution. You know this kind of thing where you have two wires and they go up like this, and this one has a slight different position than the one, and there's this one tiny thing that is connected to the two wires, and you have to move the wire from the bottom to the top. Now what you have to do is at one moment you can lift one half, but then you can try to lift the other half, but only if you bring back the first half. So you have to make this backwards movement, and then you could solve the problem. During that seminar, this beautiful object with the wires was passed around. Now I understand why most full-grown philosophers are usually identified as children, because all of them were unable to solve the task. And the toughest cases were those who were simply looking at it and imagining, someone can solve this, it's not me. Okay, sorry.
The multi-part sketch with the philosophers play football.
Yes, indeed, yeah. There was no Archimedes present. Okay. As I said, this has been a lifelong influence, and here actually are some of the papers of Leo Apostel that were published in decent places. Let me use that term. For instance, the Epistémologie de la Linguistique was published in the Encyclopédie de la Pléiade. So that's really, in terms of a good place to publish in terms of distribution, etc. The Pléiade is really a very, and the paper on the logique et dialectique is still one of the really important papers on the subject. So in that sense, the setting of the Geneva group of epistemologie génétique was very fruitful for Apostel. Yeah. And now this connection with Amsterdam, because you might wonder, okay, Peterman was his professor and his supervisor, okay, that you might expect. He was an admirer of Rudolf Carnap. He goes to Chicago to work with Rudolf Carnap. But how did Piaget come into the picture? That's not, and it happened in this way. I find this a very amusing story. In 1954, Piaget sends his traité de logique to Peterman. So Peterman and Piaget knew one another. And basically Piaget was saying, look, this Dutchman in Amsterdam, Evert Willem Beth, he's really saying that what I have written in the traité de logique is really bullshit. Could you please write a response to Evert Willem Beth? And what does Peterman do? Peterman says, I'll ask Leo Apostel. And so now Leo has it in his hands, and he starts to read the traité de logique, and in return, he sent his paper, extensive paper, Logique et Preuve, still a beautiful paper, to Piaget, and they were both interested. And that's how it came about. So it's basically because of Evert Willem Beth, who he will work with in Amsterdam in the 50s. Not much came out of it, but in the first years of Leo's participation in the Geneva Center, he also worked with Benoit Mandelbrot, who was there as well. This, by the way, was one of the luxuries, if I can use the term, for us as students of Leo Apostel. We were always informed of the latest developments. I mean, we knew about fractals and chaos theory and application thereof because through the writings of Mandelbrot, because simply Apostel brought it home to Ghent and shared it with us. Now, the importance of the constructivist approach, which is present in Piaget, but also with Evert Willem Beth, and with Gerrit Mondeling. That's why I mean, in personal conversations with Leo Apostel, he stressed the importance for himself of Gerrit Mondeling, but who's mostly forgotten for a number of reasons which I will not explain. But Mondeling was one of the very first to develop a constructivist approach to mathematics, and also to emphasize the social aspects of mathematics, of mathematical knowledge. I mean, he's the person who introduced the beautiful distinction between speaker mathematics and hearer mathematics. So you yourself writing down a proof, trying to solve a problem, and now you explaining the proof to somebody who's listening to you. For that person, that's a totally different issue. You have two different kinds of mathematics present there, which confirms apparently to the story being told about Poincaré, that reading papers of other mathematicians, he found that so annoying that he simply proved the theorems himself. Okay, this is probably a bit overdone, but I can imagine the idea. Reading the proofs of someone else is usually very hard. And that's already there. And Mondeling was also the co-founder of the so-called signific movement, something that Apostel appreciated enormously. And in addition, he was also politically very active, Mondeling. I mean, in those days, being an outspoken communist, okay, that certainly appeals to Leo Apostel. So I do not hesitate to call that the fourth influence. Yeah, thank you. Okay, here is very quickly an example of his collaboration with Evert Willem Beth, and you see how they very often clashed. I worked on the idea of proving the probability of consistent completeness. This was typically an Apostel thing. You would say, okay, you have a completeness, consistency. Along comes Gödel to tell us consistency, forget it, much more difficult than you would imagine. And then Apostel saying, well, this is the situation corresponding with the one, here you have it all, here you have nothing. What could there be a space in between where you could attribute a degree of probability of saying this system is pretty much consistent? I mean, you can rely on it. It's 95% consistency proof, meaning, for instance, that if there would be a contradiction present, it would take you enormous effort to find it. So in the meantime, please continue. I tried to explain this to Beth, who was not enthusiastic, given his doubts about the foundations of probability. Probability theory came for him after deductive logic in the logical order and was not to be used in the meta theory of the latter. I mean, Evert Willem Beth could be outspoken.
Apostel already worked in building measures on more abstract spaces. So, yeah,
indeed, yeah. And there you see who he also met, because David van Danzig was also at some moment part of the signific movement, and he has this 19. Well, it was almost at the end of his life. It was in the 50s that he wrote this curious paper. The title of the paper is 10 to the power 10 to the power 10 a natural number? And his answer is negative. So no. But, and this was the first time that somebody proposed some form of radical finitism. And this really appealed to Apostel. So when among his students, he had this student who had a degree in mathematics and now was soon to become a philosopher, he had the idea, that's the person I need. And so he asked me, what do you think about this? To be honest, I always had difficulties with infinity. I always found this a very curious notion. I mean, it's always silly that to indicate one particular incident, to say it all happened there. Okay, but the one that remained with me was in secondary school, where the teacher mathematics was drawing a line on the blackboard, indicating that it went on to infinity in that direction and on to infinity in the other direction. So I could not help asking the question, sir, does that mean that there are two infinities, one over there and one over there? And then I got the answer. Afterwards, now I think, well, that was not a bad mathematician, actually. He said, Van Bendegem, of course not. They meet at infinity. So then I saw the line curve and close. I went, what? This doesn't sound right. But it is a short paper by Van Danzig, and it's really out of the blue compared to his other work, which was mainly in statistics. He was an excellent statistician, Van Danzig, but this was, is 10 to the power 10 a natural number. And so that put me on the tracks of what then became a strict finitism in my approach. Okay. Let's see. Can I try to shorten here a little bit at least? Oh. Okay, yeah, I can be short with this slide because most of this has already been said. Namely that for Leo Apostel, logic, argumentation theory, they must go together in the sense that one can be a source of inspiration for the other. Normally speaking, I know this is a bit difficult to use those terms. It's heavily here. What will it possibly mean if you say this philosopher is always thinking context dependently? I mean, but I guess that you do get the informal meaning of what I'm trying to say. The idea of things being absolute in one sense or another was, I can safely say this was strange to him. Yeah. Very early on, he was interested from the argumentational point of view in conflict and contrasting opinions. And hence, his attention for logic able to deal with contradictions. He had the idea, but whether, well, he didn't succeed. And after him, logicians like Graham Priest have also had a go, but Hegel's philosophy is a bit too robust, so to speak, to try to tame it with a formal logical system seems to be, well, yeah, I'm not denying it is impossible, but okay. The interesting thing, as early as 1949, otherwise completely forgotten, but well, Jean Gorin, who was not really associated with universities, etc., wrote an extensive paper on logics being able to deal with contradictions. 49. That's really impressive, but it's entirely forgotten now. Also because the formalism that Jean Gorin developed was rather idiosyncratic. I mean, he had really thought it up himself, but quite interesting, really.
Is it still somewhere to be found?
Yeah. Well, I should really, I have been thinking of doing this quite. Okay, this is a very good occasion to do it. I mean, I have a printed version. I should really scan it.
Oh, please.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah. And we have a recording, so I hereby formally promise to scan it. Or you can quote me on this, but that's not necessary. I mean, I've been quoting myself. Okay. Now, and one of the characteristic things of Apostel was that he was always looking for extensions of existing proposals. I mean, well, okay, let's look at the example. You see, I've taken here as a typical example his monograph, Communication et Action. You see he's switching between Dutch and French and English. And I'll try to translate it as well as good as I can. The object of the book, so in the opening pages, where he says it's about communication and action, it is necessary to look if it is possible to give to the theory of action and the communicative interaction the same rigor as to the theory of language considered as a system. Okay, this is the time when still the Saussure on the one hand and other semiotic analysis on the other hand, who would put more the focus on the parole and not on the langue. That's a reference here, langue considérée comme système. And on the other hand, to give to the theory of, well, not language, but la langue in terms of the Saussure, un fondement dans la théorie de la parole. I mean, that was, he was always trying to do it. I mean, at a particular time, the theory of action. So actor X brings about P through action A. That kind of formalism. Well, you have the proposals of Akvist, von Richter, etc. But what they all did was simplify matters to be able to get a grip on the thing and see how far do we get with given the simplified system. I mean, take a deontic logic where you say that if something is obligatory, then the consequences of that something also have to be obligatory. But then, of course, you end up in paradoxes straight away. Because if you are obliged to do P, since P implies P or Q with the inclusive disjunction, you are thereby obliged to do P or Q, how silly Q may be. So, okay, but that was always unsatisfactory for Apostel. What are the next steps? But then he developed this curious way of writing. You see, it's halfway formalized, but the way it is formalized very often makes it nearly impossible to work with it. So if you say, okay, let's see if we can derive this or that. Well, okay, in the hands of Diderik Batens, it's a different story. But for most of us, this was not an invitation to try to further develop it, unless by simplifying. But then you were back on the road that he just wanted to depart from. So, that's I still consider this a typical example of his writing.
He tended to introduce new notation, like for every new topic, or there was a sort of general notation or formalized conceptualization along the writings, because if you become let's say an expert, then you can jump from one book to the other and find some consistency.
That's a difficult question. What I do know is that when we were looking at the unfinished manuscripts, only then did I discover a part of his working method. Whenever he was reading a book, he, along the way, as he was reading the book, he made a summary, but a rather extensive summary, using the notations of that book. And when he then wanted to bring it together into a book format, something, then he would simply use these summaries and write connecting parts, and take parts from the summary, leave things out, elaborate a bit further, which means that in the published version of the natural philosophy, at some moments the notation changes, and you're really puzzled. Wow. I mean, here he indicates Newtonian force with F, but now all of a sudden he talks about G. What's happening here? It was simply taken from a different summary.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, well, sometimes I think that accidentally he might have invented a new notation.
The role of formalization for him, it was not typical role of relatively simple complex proof of the used things. What was it? But it had a role. It played a role.
Yeah.
expression of condensation and synthesizing some idea.
Yeah, in many cases, I would say that it was a form of a shorthand. That whereas, as you indicate, if you wanted to describe something, it could be 4 or 5 sentences long, whereas you could express it in one single formula. This kind of, a form of a shorthand.
It's not a lack of understanding of its part. No.
Oh, no. Yeah. But you could imagine that if there would have been somebody at his side who was really who had the capacity to hear an idea framed in an ordinary language, to see, okay, if you formalize it in that way, then you will lose a bit on that side, but at least you will be able to elaborate on this and that. Then it would probably have been something entirely different. Well, the way that I, in my PhD, tried to develop this idea of strict finitism, I'm not quite sure whether that was something that appealed to Leo Apostel. But he was happy to see that at least there was now at least one version around. On the other hand, if you would have asked him, but how do you see it? That was a different matter. So in that sense, when I was working on my PhD, there were a number of papers of Leo Apostel on the infinity and strict finitism that were very inspiring, but the formalisms or the formalized parts in those papers were not something I could immediately do something with. But yeah, okay. Then it would probably put him in the same league with somebody like Edmund Husserl, who also had his own steno. Well, it fits, I think. When we studied the manuscripts, we saw that sometimes he wrote so quickly that when he came at the end on the right-hand side of the paper, and a word had to be hyphenated, that he would simply not write down the hyphenation mark. So it would simply, as if he was really writing here and immediately continuing, which sometimes made a difficult reading, especially if you had a word where the two parts had meaning on their own.
Would he use graphical formalisms as well, or just algebraic style ones?
Algebraic, yeah, that's true, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That gives an indication of evidence, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Okay, now I will try. Do you have an idea at what slide I am at this moment?
Number 25 out of 40.
Okay.
You have time?
Yeah. Because
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we are now changing to a different part of my expose, namely his impact on research. And this will probably, I hope that this will help to situate CLEA in that landscape. So one of the first research groups that Apostel was co-founder of was the CNRL, as it is still known, Centre Nationaal de Recherche de Logique, Nationaal Centrum voor Navorsingen. I like this term, Navorsingen in de logica. Founded in 1955, and you see most of these names probably, don't ring a bell. Of course, Peterman, you know now, that's obvious. But Philippe de Vaux, Joseph Top, who in his days was a very important logician, wrote one of the standard books on logic. You know that I'm still using the book of Joseph Top whenever it happens that I have to find something about formalizations of propositional logic, classical version, with one single axiom. Well, in the book of Joseph Top, you get a very nice listing of of a set of 10, I think about 10 possibilities. Robert Peijs. If you know in logic what is usually referred to as a natural deduction, where you try to write down the formal proof either on the object or on the meta level in such a way that it tries to resemble quote unquote ordinary reasoning as good as possible. So where you can, if you have A and B, then you derive A from this conjunction. Well, Thijs was one of the originators of that way of approaching logic. Frans Crahier as well. And the idea was that it would bring together all logicians in Belgium. At the present, the CNRL is not this, well, has lost a bit of its force. Let me put it in this way. So there's still the journal that is being published. I will come to that in a minute. Yeah, it's the younger generation of logicians do not feel particularly attracted to the Centre National de Recherche de Logique. Okay, started in 1955, so it's an impressive history. You can still see all the material on the website. Then at the University of Ghent in 1967, the group Communication and Cognition was founded by Marc de Meij and Fernand van Damme. There, the idea, this was certainly one of the very first attempts under the initiative CLEA Apostel to have an interdisciplinary research group. And one of the most amusing things that we produced, I think, as philosophers, we were probably one of the very first to have a paper published by more than 10 authors. And it was about the observation. And what we simply did was we visited a number of scholars, ranging from a biologist specialized in marine biology to a musicologist. And trying to find out what does observation mean in that discipline and how do they deal with it. And of course, it was very nice to see that there were correspondences between the musicologist on the one hand and the marine biologist on the other hand. So this was a paper written by a number of people, philosophers and scientists together. The main activities all took place at the University of Ghent, and at present, well, I'm saying as good as non-existent. I think I can now change it to non-existent. So that group has done its work. And so later you get groups such as worldviews and CLEA. So in that sense, CLEA is not per se a continuation, but similar in spirit to communication and cognition that from a number of years ago already was in decline. I'm not saying that it is a direct direct connection to communication and cognition, but it's the same thing, which Apostel very often did: try, retry, and retry. And most importantly for us, and now I'm really talking about myself and my colleagues at that moment as doctoral students, postdoc, etc. For us, communication and cognition, apart from the journal with the same title, what for us was the most important thing were the frequent conferences. If you look at the data, 77, 79, 82, 84, 84, 87, 89, I mean, this was on a very regular basis, international congresses. And then you have to say that, in his very own way, Apostel was a very good networker. I mean, the people that came to those conferences, you were always wondering, what? Is he or she also coming to this conference here in Ghent? Okay. But look at the titles. I mean, 1977, The Cognitive Viewpoint. That's Marc de Meij. That's Marc de Meij who introduced cognitive psychology into philosophy of science. Theory of Knowledge and Science Policy. That's still one of the very, probably most unknown, but one of the very nice papers of Leo Apostel, very daring. But he says, okay, take a philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, Imre Lakatos, Feyerabend, I mean the philosophers from those days. Yeah. If you look at their views on philosophy of science, what does that tell us over their political position? And that's, I mean, the way that he analyzes Lakatos, what you see appear is a form of neoliberalism in his analysis. And I mean, this was so refreshing to say, you can study this, you know. It's not silly to do it. Well, this was the introduction to the book that came out of it, locally published. I should perhaps scan that as well, because it's such a nice thing. So I hereby formally, for the second time, Logic of Discovery and Logic of Discourse. One of the main superstars present was Jaakko Hintikka, the logician. Evolutionary epistemology, which became, well, 84. It was the topic that kept Rick Pinkston busy, based on his studies with the Navajo in the United States. But again, all the core figures were present there. And in fact, it's with the Georges Sarton Centennial, which was co-organized with the 4S and East, where I, for the first time, I met Sal Restivo. Sal Restivo, the American sociologist, who wrote a lot about the sociology of mathematics, which is very nice because you're back with Monnery. And Sal didn't know about Monnery. How? Well, okay, that's not a reproach or anything. How could it be? And the last one was in 89, argumentation, logic, and cognition. And then it, well, we already passed the retirement of Apostel at that moment. So, and he was really one of the driving forces. Yeah. The journals, I can be very brief here. The journal that was published by the Centre National de Recherche de Logique was Logique et Analyse, founded in 58. The first editor for about 20 years was Paul Gauchet. For the next 30 years, me. And now we have a new editor for the journal. Jan Heijlen is now doing it from Leuven, who's a logician. And here too, the scope of the journal, was really conceived to be fairly general. Logique et Analyse itself subscribes to no particular logical or philosophical doctrine. I mean, to have your scope saying, no, we're not being specific, okay? And so it's open to articles from all points of view, provided only that they concern the designated subject matter of the journal. Namely, if logical analysis can contribute something, please do so. And that was enough. And yes.
But it's still alive and well.
Yeah. And actually, it's now being published by Peters in Leuven. He's also responsible for Leuven University Press. And it's now simply a break-even situation, which is a kind of wet dream, because as an editor, you still have complete independence, which is really valuable. But you see, 1963, the 4 issues of that year were one special issue, La théorie de l'argumentation, really devoted entirely. So that's about 600 pages. Beautiful. And I just mentioned, because I cannot go into details now anymore, a tradition that I have not yet mentioned is the dialogue or dialogical, there are differences there, logic, as it has been developed among others by Paul Lorenzen. We are now in Germany, and there was a substantial group at that moment in Essen. And that's again a different approach to trying to model the way that people talk to one another. I mean, it's with Paul Lorenzen, for instance, that you get the idea of the dialogical interpretation of logic. So if I claim A and B, that means that you have the liberty to ask me for a justification of A or of B, and I have the freedom to choose whether I use A or B. And so in that sense, the classical logical rules are now turned into dialogue rules. Yeah. So communication and cognition, they published the proceedings of the conferences, and the focus was slightly more on communication logic and theory than on dialogue logics. Okay, ignore that, sorry, I should not have put it there. And then Philosophica, the other journal I already mentioned, the journal with the title that only kept shrinking. It started out as Studia Philosophica Conventia. And then they switched to Philosophica Conventia and then to Philosophica. And then they realized that this must be the end of it. Only then to discover that in Israel there is a journal, Philosophica. Okay, fine, yes, that's cause some confusion here. It's one of my very first papers. You see the year 81, 82. I defended my thesis in 83 on the pragmatics and philosophy. And there I wrote for the first time on pragmatics and mathematics. I'm still very fond of that paper. I would now probably rewrite it entirely in the very style of Leo Apostel. I mean, it's 40 years old. Okay. But I was looking at the correspondence between Gottlob Frege and David Hilbert on the Grundlagen der Geometrie. And when you read those letters, there are about 5 letters going back and forth. You notice they are discussing philosophy of geometry and geometry. And there are so clear misunderstandings where you see they are really talking past one another. And at one moment, Hilbert was known to be absolutely a rude person, simply replying, look, I have more important things to do. Really, that's really what he wrote in the letter. So please do not reply. I had probably Frege will only have had the thought, but not expressed it. Probably saying, this Hilbert fellow in Göttingen, Jesus, how stupid can you be? And I try to analyze it from the dialogical point of view. How is it possible that both one has written the Grundlagen der Geometrie, the other one has read it? The formalism is absolutely clear. It's as clear as you can get it, which you know with Hilbert. This was always, especially if it was proofread by Paul Bernays, then you were certain that it was very well done. And still, they had this deep misunderstandings, which had to do with the interpretation of the terms. I mean, Frege really went berserk when Hilbert said, look, I don't care what points and lines are. I have here an axiom that says if you have 2 points, there's 1 line. But okay, if you want to understand points as chairs at a table and a line as a table, fine with me. To Frege, that was really, let's say, what? It is like saying God, well, if you want to replace God by a teacup, I don't care. Well, that okay. That was yeah. Okay, yeah, I have to yeah. Okay, now as to persons, one of the direct students of Apostel was Diderik Batens, who founded the group in Ghent, so that became Center Logic and Philosophy of Science at the University of Ghent. The first work of Diderik Batens was on a relevance logic. Yeah, okay. For logicians, that's a very subtle distinction between relevant logic and relevance logic. But forget it. I mean, it's where you say that you want to avoid irrelevant conclusions. I mean, no matter what your premises are, you can always say if P then P. But clearly this is irrelevant. So you want to get rid of that. And of course, you very quickly are studying contradictions, because if you have a contradiction in classical logic, it implies everything. Being irrelevant, well, that's a fine example. He started studying paraconsistent logic, so logics where you can allow contradictions without the logic becoming trivial. And again, if you have people Da Costa in South America, Meyer and Priest at that moment in Australia, well, Meyer certainly in Australia and Priest as well at that time. We knew about this because, again, Apostel attended these conferences, and usually he came back with a whole stack of photocopied manuscripts. I mean, handwritten. I mean, closer to the source is hardly impossible unless you have the person, him or herself, before you. And he, Diderik, developed this idea of adaptive logics, which actually became a research program. I'm not saying much here about teaching, because otherwise it would have been 50 slides, and it's bad enough as it is. So that's the group in Ghent. Yeah. I will be very brief here, but I have to mention it. I mean, at one moment I had a position, yes, a permanent position at University of Ghent, but then here in Brussels, Jacques Ruitings retired, and I was asked whether I was interested to apply, and I had to make the choice. Stay in Ghent, being part of at that moment already well-elaborated research group, or to come here, which was quite a challenge, to be quite honest. It was quite a challenge. So I decided, yes, let's do it. There was also, being honest, I mean, let's be honest, there was also a very pragmatical reason. The fund of scientific research was already then, if you were applying for funds, they were asking more and more that at least 2 universities in Flanders should be involved. So if I came to the VLB, then it was easy. Every application was simply Ghent and Brussels. I mean, as easy as you can get it. But that was only a pragmatic issue. So I mentioned over these years with finitism. And the second research project which came out of it, which came out of this dialogue, logic and argumentation theory, and which is now known as the study and or philosophy of mathematical practice. Although I still prefer to use the plural and talk about mathematical practices. We are sufficiently distinct, I believe. Mathematical practice suggests that there's a kind of homogeneity present, and I do not see it. Okay. Next generation. Okay. I'm very sorry. I have stopped at that generation. So who came after us, so to speak? Well, in Ghent it's Joachim Meheus and Erik Weber. And here I mentioned Bart van Kerkhove, Karel François, Stephen Duchesne, who are now running the Center for Philosophy of Science here at University, and Patrick Allo, who has now returned to the center as a researcher. Well, of course, since then, there's already a couple of generations afterwards. And I will say it in the conclusion, I will say it already now. It's a very incomplete story because there are lots of other people present, even at the generation of Diderik Batens and myself. And there's a 9-year difference between us in academic meaning. In academic terms, that's long. But then I should also mention somebody like Paula Burggraaf, who's entirely forgotten. That's really a bad thing because it was mainly Paula who was responsible for all the thinking about systems theory. That was Paula Burggraaf. So the full story would require a lot more than what I'm presenting here now. Yeah. But I think it's going well now. We are at 30.
34.
I should. Yeah. Especially since now there are still people alive. Yeah. I mean, yeah. But
Put it in the recorder.
sorry. Yeah, okay. My third promise. I promise that one day.
Right, recorded.
Well, the thing is, there is someone at Ghent University, one of the younger people around, Fons de Wolf. The Wolf. It's the Wolf, yeah, Fons de Wolf. And he's attracted to the idea, but you don't get funding. The FWO says, what?
Why?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
There is also, I understand that you don't discuss it now, but the Einstein Magnet conference and the whole development towards CLEA.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I had to leave out so many things. Yeah. No, I agree. Of course, yeah. So 34. Yes. Piece of cake. So I'll just take maximum 10 minutes. Really, promise. Maximum 10 minutes over about the outreach. As you can see, as I already mentioned in the beginning, he was well known as a person, but rather unknown as what his philosophy was all about. And the change came, when publishers, and in this case, all the credit goes to Leo de Haas, who was at that moment the chief editor of. At that time, it was still Hadewig. Later, it became Houtekiet, who said, "I want to publish stuff in Dutch of Leo Apostel, but on one condition: there has to be somebody else who's standing next to Apostel, and he takes the whole process of making the book." Okay, and Apostel agreed with that. So, for a broken order, that was, interestingly enough, a philosopher who was associated with Rudolf Boehm, so who was a phenomenologist. Without thesis is difficult. A phenomenologist. So here is the philosophical tendency only to be spoken if you have teeth. At least the name. That was Johannes Kezen. And Johannes Kezen was responsible for a broken order. And, well, it did get into the top 10 of the list at that moment. And I can assure you, it's 3 parts. The third part is on the zingeving, let's say meaning of life, if I can use the term. But the second part is on quantum mechanics. And then you get something which came to the 5th or 4th place in the selling numbers. You say, okay. And the first part was more on systems theory. I mean, it was still a difficult book. The same, by the way, with the vrijmetselarij on Freemasonry. I mentioned the story with Jean Van Bendegem. This book keeps being reprinted. But it's a very hard book. That's why when I was asked for the newest edition, where I would was willing to write an introduction to it, I wrote an introduction in the style of a walking guide. How to deal with this book? What is the best way of approaching this book? Do not start to read from page 1 to the last page. That's hell. But I mean, okay. Walking through a landscape, you don't have to go through each puddle. That's not necessary. Sometimes you can really make a nice detour. Waarde en zin van de cultuurwetenschap in de 20e eeuw, sorry. I forgot to mention hopeloos gelukkig. Hopelessly happy. I mean, I really like the title, which was written by Apostel and Jean Paul. They wrote it together. And then the atheistische spiritualiteit, atheist spirituality. Let me say, a few words, but really a few words because it's such a difficult topic. Okay, he wrote many papers on the subject. You see the titles: mysticism, ritual, atheism. You're wondering what are the two these terms doing together. The next slide. Right. All of these papers have now been collected into a single book, Atheistische Spiritualiteit. It's in Dutch. It collects, I think it collects all the Dutch papers, with one additional one that was not yet published at that time, over spiritualiteit, on spirituality, for non-theists and theists. So if you deal with excluded middle and you do not worry about overlap, I mean, people can easily be non-theist and not realize that in fact they are theists, etc. Okay, that's basically Nietzsche. It's for everyone. Yeah. Okay. And this is simply one quote, and I've inserted this in the presentation because it shows a different. Well, it's not a different apostle, but if you are faced with it for the first time, you say, "What? Is that the very same philosopher you have been talking about for far too long?" Meaningful things happen to me day in, day out that are unrelated. I can't help but believe that someone wants to tell me something. I keep asking, what do they want to tell me? Suddenly, while listening to a symphony, I know that I'm not alone, that I'm accepted, that I'm not working in a desert. There may be an answer somewhere. I mean, that's also Leo Apostel. This meaning of atheist spirituality is the idea of, God need not play a part here. Actually, in one of the papers, he constructs a proof, logical proof for the non-existence of God that is simply too good to be true, because no matter what property you attribute to God, it leads to a contradiction. You say, well, okay, things can go well, this goes a bit too well. So he's doing too much to really tell you, no, I mean, no, I'm talking about this universe that I'm a part of. I want to try to understand what am I doing here? I mean, it's that's the reason why he was also meditating. The meditation for him was a way of dealing with the emotions expressed here in this quote. It's something foreign to me, to be quite honest, to do a meditation exercise starting from the question, what is it like to be a star? I mean, talking about the actual physical object, I mean, not a star on the Walk of Fame. What is it like to be a star? Well, the way that he talked about it, it was really clear to me. This was genuine. This was really genuine. But yeah, no, I couldn't relate to it.
Is it also not a certain kind of, in the good sense, empiricism? So they want to be speaking clearly, those who want to study mysticism have to practice it.
Yeah.
That's an understanding of how you observe these kind of things.
Yeah, right? Agree. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In conclusion, that's 39, I think. Yeah. Want to go after this? Want to go? It's simply a quote. It's a quote. So shortcomings. Of course, my story is very incomplete. Well, I did mention Rick Pinkston and Mark de Meij, but I should also mention Werner Calvout. I mean, it was not only Rick Pinkston who was so enthusiastic about the evolutionary epistemology, more so Werner Calvout, who unfortunately also passed away a number of years ago, Koen Raas, who together with Jacques van Landschot produced this interview book, Afbraak en Opbouw, so the destruction and rebuilding, if you like. I mentioned that the younger generation is lacking here, and of course that I ignored, I just mentioned Paul Gauchet, but if you look at the French part of Belgium, then you have to talk about people as Jean Ladrière, for instance. To a large extent, what Apostel meant for the one part of our country, Jean Ladrière played that part for the French-speaking part of Belgium. Paul Gauchet, I mean, really a Quine specialist. his writings are really so careful. Michel Meyer, who unfortunately, in 2020 passed away. The student of Perelman after Apostel. So yes, I should all take him, because in the Centre National de Recherche de Logique, that's where we all met. So there you had all of them together. But it does show that Apostel did have an impact on philosophy in Belgium. Yes. Internationally, it's more difficult to make an assessment, to be honest, because of his strange way of publicizing that I mentioned. Hardly a topic that did not draw his attention. Well, when we had this Memorial Day where 10 philosophers spoke about 10 filosofen getuigen, that I do have on PDF. So 10 philosophers that were influenced by Apostel brought a testimony to explain and one of the fun moments was Etienne Vermeers, who said, well, first his confession that he always addressed Apostel with professor, that the idea of addressing him as Leo was unthinkable. And that at long after searching, he did find a topic whereof Apostel knew nothing. Animal psychiatry. So he made his point. I mean, if you have to go that far to find something. And the question that that does puzzle me: how well would he have fit in today's academia? If he already had those problems looking at Carnap, what would it mean today? This madness. So I have a final quote from Gebroken Order. It's my translation. I should have a second and third go at it. It's not perfectly done here. If I only find meaninglessness, zinloosheid, I will still try to make deserts into fertile land, chaos into order, senseless experience into meaningful experience. The meaning of life is different from its purpose. Even if there is no objectively determinable goal, I still work from the objective fact of meaning. I'm not advocating the heroic pathos of self-overestimation, but the prudence and modesty of laboring the road that makes sense. And I have one reference, that's the very last slide. Part of what I have said today can be found in this paper that I wrote. It's I'm sorry that the resolution wasn't good enough. So the book is a collection of papers dedicated to Francine Abeles, an American logician, modern logic, East and West. And they asked me because, I have known Francine Abeles for a number of years. And so I was invited to contribute something. And I wanted to do something about Manuri and the significs, etc. But they say, well, no. They say, look, are you interested in something about the situation in Belgium? And the reaction I got was amazing. They said, oh, yes, please do, because we know nothing about it. So then I wrote this paper, Logical Imitation in Belgium, the Role of Leo Apostel. And that summarizes, not all, I mean, the paper is a fragment. But in the paper, I also pay attention to the teaching of logic. Wondering, okay, if you ask the question, students that study philosophy in Belgium, be it in Ghent, in Antwerp, or wherever, in Liège, Namur, no matter, and they have logic courses, what image of logic is being presented? And there are marked differences. There are clear differences. I mean, if you would put on this table here a number of course notes from Ghent, Antwerp, Brussels, Leuven, yeah, I would be able to say, I would perhaps have doubts between Ghent and Brussels. But then, of course, I mean, after Apostel retired, I was the student of Diderik Batens. Okay, but Antwerp and Leuven, yeah, you can tell them apart. It's not necessarily a critique, it's just an observation. That, yeah. Okay, I'm really most thankful that you are have been willing to undergo this. Okay.
Really good.
For the viewers at home.
Can we do
Oh, wow.
favor, or can we do us the favor?
Yeah.
Make the list of reference that belongs to this paper or to this presentation at some point. So, because
Yeah.
some people, some papers will be relatively easily possible to be found back. And others, yeah, if you don't find them back, we hope that you keep your promises.
Okay. Yeah. So I've promised to. No, but we have a recording. So the paper of Jean Coren. What was the second one? Oh yes, the philosophy of science, political interpretation.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the list of references.
A list of references of the paper.
Of the papers and the books that you cited
Mentioned in the slide.
and that you mentioned,
Oh.
not always in the slides.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay.
Recording there.
It's a moment of free choice, you know, like, do you mind this?
No, I said, can you do us a pleasure, because it would be helpful to find some of the this is really interesting.
Can you generate the transcript of the recording by YouTube?
Well, Martha, you do have the PowerPoint now.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so can we put the PowerPoint on our website?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there were some, sorry that I'm insisting, there were some interesting mentions which I noted.
Yeah.
Referenced in the
Yeah.
text, of course, I understand.
Okay, there's a question here by Bart de Moor
Yeah.
asking for the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So we will
No
publish
problem.
the
Yeah.
slides on the
Okay.
CLEA
Yeah,
website,
yeah.
where the announcement of the seminar was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, good.
Excellent.
Wow. Okay, the first two ones are easy tasks to do, although I'll have to dive into my archive to find the text, because he presented, I mean, there are some texts that only exist in a stenciled form, so were produced in a very limited amount.
It only makes it more interesting.
Yes.
You know, Yeah.
It's pretty relevant to say.
yeah.
Now it becomes artifact. Getting better.
And it's not that these tasks take ages to do. I mean, it's well, that's why I asked the editors of the publishing house if I could make a PDF out of the book 10 Philosophen Getuigen and Philosophers Testify. Because at one moment I had the idea, but it didn't work. To say, okay, find 10 present-day philosophers, young philosophers, and give each one of them one of the 10 papers from the book 10 Philosophers Testify, and to write a reaction. No matter, I mean, if you would be in the line of I want to further elaborate this, fine. If you want to go into discussion with it, fine. But it was very difficult to find 10 young philosophers who, for instance, would know sufficiently about the work of Karel Boulaert. If you were a student in Ghent at those days, Karel Boulaert was a very influential philosopher, very hard to read, but with a curious, perfect sense of humor. His main work of Karel Boulaert is Seen from Andromeda. So he analyzes the human condition on Earth, seen from Andromeda. And so, of course, I asked him, Karel, but if you are on Andromeda, you no longer see the Earth. And his response was, that was my aim. He analyzes the condition humaine, and preferably he doesn't want to see it. So we didn't find 10 people who would be, I mean, Johan Braakman can tell you a lot about Etienne Vermeers, but once Johan is no longer here, that will become very quickly, I would expect, an enigma.
But maybe it would be a good idea to other people, rather than to write a piece, to give a presentation like the one you did now on their.
Well, that's one of the interesting things. I mentioned in the beginning that Mastereel Fonds organized, they have done it a couple of times, but it now seems to have, they have discontinued, although I still have the idea there are lots of places where we could present this material. 4 lectures on the 4 philosophers that made up the Ghent Department of Philosophy, going back to the 60s, 70s. Leo Apostel, Etienne Vermeers, Jaap Kruithof, Rudolf Boehm. And so in the 4 cases, somebody would be asked to tell us, to explain what their contribution has been, etc. So for Etienne Vermeers, Raakman, Jaap Kruithof, Freddy Mortier, Rudolf Boehm. At first, it was going to be, no, not Kezen. But then finally, who did it was Sonja Lavard. She did it, and I did the Apostel. Well, that's why I have this part on the outreach. This was meant for a non-academic audience, and they were totally surprised about the academic life of Apostel. The image they had was Apostel, the public philosopher, and so they were amazed to hear that there's really an academic component, a very important one, with lots of influence, etc. And I mean, I have done it a couple of times, but as said, it has now been discontinued, which is a shame. But one of the first things I asked, does everybody here in the audience know Leo Apostel? And I went, yeah, sure, of course we do. Yeah. I mean, oh wow, when he entered the room, yeah, but, and if I would ask you in 4 or 5 sentences, his philosophy, what was that about? Oh, yeah, wow.
That's not fair, because he would not even be himself able to answer that question.
True, yeah. True.
So that would
And
be a
in
good
fact,
answer. This.
To be honest, yeah, it was a bit difficult to read, you know. One thing many people deduce, and that's not a wrong way of thinking, certainly not, was he was one of the co-founders of the organized humanistic societies, etc. So they associate him with that. So they assume, okay, so he has een vrijzinnig wereldbeeld. He's a free thinker. True, yes, true. But that's okay. That's a very brief description. And then after the lecture, they tell me, you're right. We didn't know him.
Is it not the case that you could say that his concern is always, whatever the subject that not a text but deals with, is understanding what's going on, understanding what it means to do philosophy in theory and in practice, understanding what argumentation is, understanding why logic is important, and understanding why you cannot apply it always in that blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I mean, that maybe sounds superficial, but I don't think
no way. No, I would, I would fully agree.
Yeah, he didn't really defend the thesis. He wants to understand different positions and trying to integrate them, but the integration is more like putting the one next to the other, like this one says that about it, and this one says that about it, and this one says that about it. Then in the end, you still don't know what is his position.
Yes.
Well, that's why
it's not necessary to gain a kind of consistent overview. It's understanding the thing as such and connecting it to other things.
Yeah. So that's why I focused on the method.
That's very good.
Yeah. I think the idea.
That's why the method, although it seems a bit idiosyncratic, makes sense.
Yeah.
From that perspective, it makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. One of the fun things with Apostel was if you had an idea for a paper to write, and you wrote the first one sheet summary of the kind of thing you wanted to do, and you gave it to him, then two things happened. Or he looked at it, read it, and when he answered, he only uttered the word interesting, then you know you could chuck it away. That was his skill, interesting. And then he stopped. But if he said first paragraph, this has been done. You must look at that, and that. The second idea will get you nowhere. I mean, that one has had a go at it and doesn't work. This is a nice idea, but I would certainly urge you to read . And so you came out with a reference list and one sentence from your one-page summary, but you had something to go on. And that meant that he found it very interesting. If he didn't change anything, you say, okay, well, drop it. That was the out. Well, actually happened with my PhD. When I had the first 50 pages, almost the first chapter, I gave it to him, and he had read it very quickly. I mean, in time, not that he simply thoroughly, but quick. So the week after, I could already come to his apartment. When I left, it was from 2 to 5. When I left at 5, I still had from the 50 pages, 5 pages. So 45 had gone down the drain, but I knew that these 5 were really the starting point. So it's like, yeah, somebody cleaning up the garden, and then finally you see the path. So coming home and telling my partner at that moment, oh wow, he destroyed 45 pages, and I'm happy. And if I look back now at those 45 pages that disappeared, say, yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, he was right. Yeah, not always, but there he was right. Yeah. I'm happy to see that all the virtual are still there. But I mean,
Do not know what you're doing.
Do we know it from one another? Yes.
The significant movement to the Vienna Circle of mathematics. That went over very quickly.
Yeah, well, the main thing was that from the significant perspective, you would list their view on mathematics as a form of constructivism, which was not necessarily the case with
Like a constructivist version of the Vienna Circle?
Yeah, if you like. Yeah, but especially Manuri or Manuri, there's discussion about the correct pronunciation. Yeah. Yeah. He emphasized the social aspect. Not only what you would expect. I mean, it's always very odd that nobody almost seems to have any problem that you introduce the social aspects when you talk about mathematics in education. Because you have the classroom, you have a social setting, of course. But when it comes down to professional mathematics, then all of a sudden it, yeah.
The connection between the school around Latour and this kind of movement?
Well, there has not been done enough work on that. And
because it could be, right?
Yes, but I have been trying on and off to make a translation of a short paper of Manuri, because one of the problems with the Significant Circle is that they mainly published in Dutch and in German. and occasionally, very occasionally in French, hardly anything in English. And which meant that the recognition remained local. And if one of the foremost members, namely Brouwer, at one moment departed ways with Manuri, namely ignoring all the social aspects and coming to the notion of intuition, etc., which is again an individual stance. It's no longer correct to label Brouwer as somebody, well, who has been a member of the Significs, but the way that we know him later on as the founder of intuitionism has little or nothing to do with Significs. The best illustration is the fact that in the very nice book of Arend Heiting, his lectures on intuitionism, the very first chapter is a dialogue. There's a formalist present, a Platonist present, an intuitionist present, and a signific present. So Heiting clearly made a distinction between a signific member will talk differently, will deal with a number of issues differently than the intuitionist. So he has them as separate partners in the dialogue, which I find very telling, which means that Heiting had a very good feeling to see, no, what my teacher Brouwer has done is not what Manuri has done. I have to keep that separate.
It would be an interesting science, history of science project at some point to bring this thing.
Yes.
But it's paradoxical that the significant movement remains local. Right?
Yeah. Well, they had connections with the Wienerkreis, but not with no matter who from the Wienerkreis, but mainly because when he fled Vienna, he first came to Amsterdam to meet up with, among others, with Manuri, Otto Neurath. You can expect that Otto Neurath was more sensitive to the significant ideas, and certainly not somebody like Moritz Schlick. That would, he probably wouldn't understand what is this all about. So he first went to Amsterdam to meet up with them. And if you look, they organized a number of conferences. And those conferences were indeed international. I mean, if you see a conference and one of the speakers is Jean Piaget, then you see that it was Manuri who introduced Piaget to the Dutch academic world, well, part of the Dutch academic world.
Actually, it's a big hole in our understanding of what happened in that period, that all these so-called local, but very a little bit invisible, but influential things are not yet researched and
Are not part of the academic identity.
No.
Yeah, but not even subject of serious historical research. I mean, that would make them at least accessible. This kind of stuff can be very relevant for whoever studies whatever.
No, true. I mean, when by accident, actually, I'm now forgetting the name, a researcher who was doing work on Tarski. I wanted to write an intellectual biography of Tarski. And went to Harvard, the library, to find documents, etc. And he came upon a set of documents that nobody had ever found before, lying there all those years waiting, where you see that in the 40s, there was a discussion group, meeting group, consisting originally of Quine, Carnap, and Tarski. And one of the things they were discussing was strict finitism. I mean, if you would have said before these documents were unearthed, if you would have said, the way of thinking of Tarski, for instance, to me that seems compatible with a strict finitist view. They would say, that's madness. But we now, I mean, thanks to Carnap. No, really, I mean, no matter what he did, he always made notes. So he had a discussion with somebody, in the evening, he would write up that discussion. I mean, this is great because we have so many testimonies thereby, and he was very meticulous. It was not necessarily his interpretation, and if so, then you could easily pick out the elements. I mean, at one moment, Carnap agreeing with Heidegger. Okay, no problem there. And they were discussing strict finitism. And okay, they saw the problems, etc. And Carnap developed it formally. And it is like what he there did was exactly what would happen 40, 50 years later. I mean, this is crazy. So, I mean, having those sources, yeah. And then you see that Quine, working together with Nelson Goodman, then published the papers on the nominalist interpretation of arithmetic, where they do allow the potential infinite. Because they didn't see how it could be done, so they opened up a little bit by allowing potentially infinite, and those papers have been published in the Journal of Symbolic Logic, etc. But in a sense, if you read the paper of Quine and Goodman, if you do not know the history before, you would say, wow, that's daring, a purely nominalist interpretation of arithmetic. But in a sense, it was the result of giving in, saying, well, we have to be a bit more liberal here. So, yeah, potentially infinite, that's okay. Although I still think, though I'm not sure, that for a nominalist, it should, no, that I'm certain of, it should at least be an issue. Whether to go for the finite or the potentially infinite or the actual infinite, it should at least be an issue. Well, at least that was Apostel's conviction. Being a nominalist, you had to be a finitist. That was his view.
Time to close.
Yeah.
Questions from the audience? I think there are some.
Maybe from the online audience.
Yeah, we are 20 minutes already after the like. You think from the question to the audience online, would anybody like to ask a question? With a warning that we have a bit of a audio problem.
Not from my side, thank you.
Oh, no? Oh, okay.
Kermit is okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've been cured.
Not on my side.
He's back.
Yeah. All right. So no question. One question here in the chat. What happened with the unpublished PhD drafts of Leo?
I do not like saying this, but when the whole bunch of publications was moved to the central library of Ghent University, they were destroyed.
Maar nee,
Ja.
onnozelaars.
Ja.
Dat nog maar in de jaren 90.
Laat.
Nog later zelfs. Maar nee, hoe echt moet het zijn?
Dat heeft jaren in de kelder gestaan bij Ghent. Dus ja, die zijn weg.
Allee, jongen.
Ja.
Hoe debiel kan die toch zijn?
Ja, inderdaad, I agree, too bad. Ja.
It's a strange note to finish, but
Ja, well, okay, I mean.
for the reality.
That's why it's even more.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. I mean, in
Yes.
March, well, you could have deduced it because I almost given my birth date. I mean, I'm turning 70 at the end of March. I can't wait too long to write things down. I mean, the visit in Amsterdam, we were there for a colloquium on significs. And Fred Muller was there, Harry de Zwart named them all, and asked, and is there a way, possibly in Amsterdam, how's the archive, etc.? Well, they told me that all the nachlas of Manuri is still in the central library of the Universiteit van Amsterdam, waiting to be disclosed.
Okay, at least it's not destroyed.
Yeah, but it's there for almost 30 years now. Okay. In a way, I understand it. I mean, but as long as that is not done, you have no access.
But that's again why both papers and testimonies like yours now are important, because it can also point younger researchers who are interested in this kind of history and in this kind of interdisciplinary approach, by the way.
Yeah.
That it might be relevant to go and check out such archive, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Jean Paul, many thanks for the wonderful talk.
Thank you. I mean, thank you.
And probably now is the time for your announcement about the opinion.
No fire. There's no fire.